Welcome back to 20 Games in 30 Days. Today I am making Space Invaders. This one is quite exciting because I finally am going to be making some art. If you've been watching along, the first couple of games I made, Pong and Breakout, both used primitives, so essentially just rectangles that were colored, and there wasn't any real art to speak of in those games. So for this one, I'm going to be drawing the player and the bullets and the aliens and the mothership, and I think I completely forgot about barriers, but that's okay. This game actually was my first 2-day game, so this is 20 games in 30 days, game 3, days 3 and 4. I'm really proud of the way that this one turned out. I'm going to do a little different than I've done if you've seen my previous videos. I'm going to do a little more show and tell, kind of skip through more of the process, because I have 12 hours of footage, and I don't really want it to be a 4-hour video, if my math serves me correct from the previous videos I made. So I'm going to try to keep this a little shorter, but yeah, I will be showing off how I made Space Invaders. One note, if you're familiar with the original Space Invaders, I've been given a little bit of history at the beginning of these videos. And Space Invaders was 1978. It was made by Tomohiro Nishikado, and he spent a lot of the time making the microcomputer himself. He got microprocessors in from America, but assembled everything together. It was one of the first games to use a microcomputer, and because of that, one of the major features of the game was that it would speed up with time because the microcontroller was a little slow and took a little time to render all of the aliens or invaders moving. So that's where the difficulty curve came from. The first game was a difficulty curve. It's also the first game that lets you input your high score. It was a major success, but I'm actually going to be modeling my invaders based on the 1999 release of Space Invaders. This is a version that I played as a kid growing up. It's very, very 90s of a game, but I enjoyed it. And so I'm going to be kind of taking this remake that took Space Invaders to 3D, and I'm going to be making a demake of the remake, I guess we can say. So it's going to be Space Invaders, the remake demake, and let's jump right in. So the first thing I did, Nishikado actually was inspired by Breakout, which, if you remember, was the last game I made. So I thought it would be a good idea to make Space Invaders based on my Breakout game, just like I made my Breakout game based on Pong. I started down that path, and after not too long, realized that was probably more work than it was worth. So I have a mock-up that I'm going to refer back to a couple times here, but I decided to start with a blank project. So I'm here in the blank project. I'm adding just a black background, expanding it to fill the whole game space, and then changing the name and some basic setup. And then I'm going to jump right in by making some artwork. I'll be back and forth between art and programming, but I wanted to at least get a couple basic elements in so I could be moving and playing with something that isn't just a rectangle. So that's what I am doing first. So the first thing I did, I decided to create the original Space Invader, kind of quintessential alien you see on the box art. So this little crab-looking guy, or I don't know what he's supposed to look like, but this guy I decided to make, and so I'm doing 16 by 16 for my art, and I believe this, I forget how wide it was, but I'm going to end up doing... Right now I'm doing 1 pixel to 1 pixel, and I believe eventually I will actually double this, so then I'll be doing 32, and I ended up sticking with that for the rest of the time. 16 by 16 wasn't quite enough density for these aliens that I eventually am going to want to make, but I just want to start by getting an alien on there, so this is a placeholder. The rest of the art will not be placeholder, but I'm starting with the placeholder alien art at least. So we'll jump right in with this one. We got arm already. We're gonna do those little antenna on top, arm on the other side, these little mandibles, and then the eyes, and there we go, our first art. So I had the idea that I could use Godot's modulate function to change the colors. So everything I'm doing for this game will be black and white, and the aliens will simply be colored through the modulate function. I quickly learned that I can't make them black. White actually is the color I want, and black is black. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to change the color of the alien and resave it, and then it'll show up as a vibrant green. And that's what I'll be using for all of my art. Everything will be 100% black and white, and it'll be modulated. So the problem with that is I don't get two separate colors per for one sprite. Everything is a single color, but I don't have to deal with learning how to use multiple colors. This is, again, my first time using Libre Sprite, so I thought it'd be easier to stick with a straight up black and white palette. So that's what I'm doing here, and now that the alien is white, it's showing up on the black and white palette like I thought. So you can see it is now green. The next thing I'm going to do is take this alien and throw him in the scene a whole bunch of times, just to get a general collection of them, and then I'll move on to drawing the tank. This isn't the final arrangement, but I did put them nested underneath a invader parent class object, which I will use later. So at this point, I go to create a new sprite for the ship, and I'm a bit indecisive, but I decided to go 32 by 32. I feel like 16 pixels may not be quite enough, but I convinced myself that I'm going to use 4 pixel blocks. So essentially I'm still doing 16 by 16, but I've bought myself flexibility. In the end, I create this ship and I realize that it's just too blocky and I can't do it with this few pixels, so I start again with 32 by 32. I don't know in general if it's easier for pixel art to do more or less pixels, but I found 32 is a sweet spot for me, at least for this game, so that's what I stick with going forwards. And now I'm here with the 32 by 32. I also take the ship and copy it from the video that I have and put that into a sprite and then set it next to mine. So I have a larger, clearer reference right there. At first I try messing around with making it smaller, but I decide it's fine if it's more pixels than what I'm doing because it's just a reference photo, but it's at least bigger and clearer. So now that I have that, I'm starting to figure out how to draw this thing. It takes me a while, I have to Google it, but I find that there is a mirroring option, which I'm going to use for basically all of these. So I don't have to draw the same thing on both sides. I can just simply draw the same thing on one side and it'll mirror to the other. So I am blocking out with black and white and some shades of gray. I'm trying to capture the major elements, and then I'll go back and I'll do a little bit more shading later. At this point, I'm trying to do a little bit of contact shading where the two different parts are touching. I feel like it would be darker there, so I'm going to mess around with that a little bit more. And then this one is actually fairly close to done. So I'm going to, after this, put it into the game, and then we'll start doing some coding on movement and stuff. But yeah, this is my first ever Libre sprite that wasn't just the other one that was directly copying from a photo. So I'm probably could be better, but I'm fairly proud of it. I think it looks good. And there we go. All that's left is to put it into the game and see how it looks. I am unchecking this filter option when I import, which means that every sprite will be visible. Otherwise, they kind of shade into each other, which looks better on larger textures. But for this one, I keep most of them unfiltered. I believe there are a couple later on that I will filter, just because I do think they look better that way. But for these, they're unfiltered. And then I'll also make it larger. And I decided for the ship that a nice shade of blue looks pretty good. So that's what I'm doing with that right now. So I quickly decide before I get too far in that I'm going to double the size of the alien, so I'm not going to have everything get messed up when it is suddenly larger than it was in the scene. It turns out it's still going to be a little bit too small, and I'll have to fix that, but at least I'm trying. So this is now 32 by 32, and that's the size I'm using going forward. I do clean him up just a tad, so he doesn't look quite as blocky since the tank isn't that blocky. But I will, again, remove this one. This is just a placeholder, but I at least want it to look good while I'm using it. And for the bullets, both the player missile and the alien bomb, I will be using 16 by 16 canvas size, so half of what I'm using for them. So I need to go in and find a image of each one that I want from the video of my playback earlier. So I have this little missile from the player, that is his standard bullet, so I'll be using that. And then from the aliens, I ended up going with, I'm going to use all four, but the first one, I decided to just capture this little blue gradient thing. So I make both of those real quick, and that's it for the beginning art. So the final thing I'll do is I will scale both my bullet and the alien bullet down to half size. So it's actually double the pixel density as everything else, which is not entirely accurate to what the original Space Invaders was capable of, but since I have this option in Godot, I'm going to scale them so they look nice even if I have double pixels in some places compared to others. But I have my bullet going up, the alien bullet coming down. I did some final shading touch-ups, so my ship's light blue. I played with the bullet but thought it looked best white after messing around, and the alien bullet is currently a nice hue of, we'll say, magenta or purple, whatever you think that color is. So at this point, I'm going to switch over and start defining all of my scripts and making movement. So the first thing I'm going to do is simply define my input map. I'm only going to have 3 inputs. I'm going to have moving left, moving right, and shooting, but I will define that for multiple inputs. I'm going to do the keyboard, I'm going to do both WASD and the arrows, and then also a controller. So I can sit back and play the game using that. So the next step is to add 2 colliders to my ship. I say 2 because one of them is attached to the kinematic body and is used to sense if I am running into the invisible walls on the edge of the screen. That's all handled automatically. There's no code to tell me when I move too far out of bounds. But that one is smaller, and then there's a larger collider around it, which is actually, it's an area, not a physics collider, and that one will sense when an invader bullet collides with my ship, and then I will call a function. From there, I have a signal up into my player's script. So we will connect those 2 signals, and then I have started the script already, but we're going to have a basic movement script, and we're going to have those 2 colliders. We'll filter in here. So I'll show off the movement script, and then we'll start working on the sensing both ways for shooting and being shot. And with a little tinkering, I now have a player movement. So when I fire this game up and click the side buttons or move the joystick, I will move side to side. So there's my first step, and I have the script is doing a little more, but I'm going to now go and work on the bullets. So the next step was to add in the spawning of bullets. So I have a script here that will simply create a bullet prefab from an instance, or instance from a prefab, and it will place them. They are not moving yet, so now that we have bullets in the scene, we want to give them a velocity. And just like that, we have a simple movement script. If you'll notice, there's some extra things here. I already have it set up with the areas and colliders, and I'm starting to think about how these bullets will be destroyed when they leave the screen or hit an invader. But for now, I'm just testing the speed, and once again, I make the mistake of putting the velocity way too low. I set it to 100, completely forgetting that we are measuring in pixels in Godot. So this needs to be a lot higher if I want it to move across the screen at a higher rate. Instead of just changing the number, I instead changed the formula. So now 1 means that we are moving across the entire length of the screen in 1 second. So since we're kind of getting to choose what arbitrary units we want, instead of using 1 pixel as 1 unit of distance, I'm using 1 screen height as 1 unit of distance, which I think is a little easier for me to intuitively understand. And I'll use this for everything, including the invaders, all their movement speed. I think I eventually will update the player speed script as well. But for now, we have bullets crossing the screen 1 a second. As you notice, I can shoot as many as I want, and when they leave the screen, they just keep moving. So we're gonna have to clean those up soon before we probably won't have a memory leak in any realistic amount of time, but for best practice, I don't wanna be having a bunch of bullets just floating off in the middle of nowhere. So we're gonna clean those up. I've given my bullet a destroy function now that can be called, and I am placing in a kill brush. So this is just a area that will check for collision against one thing specifically. That thing is player bullets. And when it sees a bullet enter the kill volume, it will call the destroy function on the bullet, and then the bullet will take care of removing itself and signaling to the player that it's been destroyed. And once this is in place, because my other scripts are already set up, I will have double shot working basically automatically. So before I go too far, I realize I should probably explain what I mean by double shot. The original Space Invaders only had 1 bullet available on the screen at any given time. So as you're shooting, you have to wait for that bullet to either hit an invader or leave the top of the screen before you get your next one. And that made a lot of sense for the arcade, but a lot of games later on, shoot 'em ups and different things, have used timers or something else instead. But I decided to kind of stick with that, but instead of just 1 bullet, I started with 1 bullet, I got it working, and then because I used a integer to express how many bullets I am able to shoot, I turned that up, and the 99 re-release had a power-up that I very much enjoyed using that gave you 2 bullets at a time, so it was still restricted like the classic Space Invaders, but not nearly as much. So I decided I was going to do the same thing, but all the time. So by default, for my version, you get 2 bullets at once, which just makes it a little faster, and you spend a lot less time waiting for your bullet if you miss, but there still is that kind of natural penalty there was on the original. It is really funny seeing how quickly I get distracted on these projects. I never realized it until I started making videos and can look back and see it, but I have a working player ship that can move side to side and shoot bullets. I have a static alien that can't move yet and cannot shoot bullets. What do you think is the next thing I should work on? If you said Mothership, you would happen to also be in agreement with earlier me. My thought was, hey, I have a bullet script that moves something across the screen at a fixed speed. You know, the Mothership moves across the screen at a fixed speed. Let's go ahead and draw that now. So, I don't know, whatever, but I have a Mothership, and I can now put that in the game. So I will not be using the bullet script to animate that, even though that was the reason I got off on this tangent. I will be using the invader script once it's created, but I have at least another piece of art, so that was a nice distraction from writing code. So now that we have that out of the way, I'm back on the actual invaders themselves. So I'm going to add a collider on them. I'm going to create a script. And then before I allow them to receive damage, I'm going to give them a spawn script as well. So I'm going to set that up real quick. And here we go with a shoot script. You may notice that there is no place where this is called. It simply is a function that will drop a bullet. So we're actually going to call it from a parent class up above. So we're going to add a script to that one as well. And here we are with that. It's going to check random, and if it comes up true, it'll select one invader out of the formation and ask that one to send a bullet down. So now we're going to throw a bunch of invaders in a row, and then after a tiny bit of debugging, I'll hit play, and we have purple rain coming down. Turns out my random values are way too high, but I think that's okay because I'm going to want them to be controlled together. They're going to kind of be doing a swarm behavior where they'll be told how quickly to shoot their bullets. So for now, that's fine. I'll just turn that number down and let that be. But we now have bullets going in both directions. Now all we have to do is copy over the collision code that the player already had and put it on the invader, and then I'm going to do some very careful layering and masking to make sure that the invader is looking for the player's bullet, the player is looking for the invader's bullet, the player is not looking for his own bullet, invader's not looking for his own bullet. So because of all that, I don't check anything. I simply say, if I have a collision, remove me, and as you can see, that worked great. So I now have the player and invader, and I'll throw the script on the mothership, and then I'll also have that, and all of them will be responding. So I now have essentially a static shooting gallery where you can shoot at them, they can shoot at you, but they're still not moving. One small omission that was very easy to fix, so I decided it would be worthwhile to throw some bumpers in really quick. These are just some collision bodies. Because we're using physics, it will automatically stop the ship from moving. So I'm going to throw those in, and then I spend a fair bit of time tweaking it so I can move to exactly the edge of the screen without going off. After that, I added a collider to the mothership and threw the shooting Space Invaders script on there, so that will also be destroyed when you shoot it. And finally, it is time to start the main, at least scripting part of the game, the side-to-side and up and down movement of the invaders. My original idea was to do this like if you can imagine, a gimbal, so like a 3D printer, where the invaders would move side to side, but they'd be in a larger frame that would move up and down. And I ended up not doing it that way. Once I got going, it made more sense for the invaders to have their own movement. But it was just one of those things where I kind of tried a few different things and ended up changing my plans partway through. So at this point, I have it working just far enough where they will start moving to the side, but when I hit play, they don't bounce anywhere and they just bunch up because they are still physics objects after all. So I can just sit here in the corner and shoot them all, but they never start moving the other way. So now that we have a one-way movement, we're going to need to figure out how to add a bounce to it. Here, that is in action. They simply signal up to the invader frame, and it'll tell all of them to turn around simultaneously. So when one hits the edge, they're all going to move. And a thing you may notice is they're actually kind of wiggling back and forth a little bit. That's actually, they're aliasing a little bit, but what that is some of them are, I just drug them out into the scene, so their position is a fraction of a pixel, and that's why they're shaking. So when I go and clean up their positions, that actually is going to stop, which is kind of an interesting side effect. So I'm just going to start playing with the speed a little bit here. I want him to move fairly quick. So I'm actually going to check against the 1999 Space Invaders that I played growing up, and I want to see what the speed of that one looks like, and then I'm going to try my best to match that speed myself as I go. So after looking at that, I'm realizing that my speed is way too low, so I'm going to crank it way up. And now it's too fast for all the invaders. So the next step is going to be dividing the speed by the number of invaders on screen. And that's going to get that classic Space Invaders effect where it starts slow but speeds up. I need now the invaders to signal up to that frame that holds them. So when one invader is shot, I'm going to need to run a script that will change the speed of all the remaining invaders, and then we'll keep track of how many are left. So I have a little trick here. I don't know in Godot how to map if you have, say, 10 Space Invaders sitting in one place, how to connect all of their signals simultaneously to a object that's holding them. I think the official Godot recommendation is to do that in a script, but for something like this scene is predefined at the start of the game. I don't really feel a need to add unnecessary code to do that, so I just go in and edit the diff for that scene file in VS Code. This is not necessarily recommended. They definitely say that you shouldn't go in and modify your scene source code like this, but it works for me. So if you know a better trick on how to do that, let me know. But last time I Googled it, they said you shouldn't do this, and I didn't like that answer. So I'm doing some unfortunate hacks instead. But it is hard to argue with results. It looks like we have a little bit of script editing later. Both the movement back and forth while it's bouncing off the walls and the... Oh, we had a... Okay, there's still a few issues left, but we do have the moving side to side and speeding up as they go. I will be adding a little bit more, but first, let's get them separated into 4 rows. And like I said before, that will fix that anti-aliasing issue when they all are, see how they're wiggling side to side like that. So we'll have that fixed as well. I'm going to try a handful of different things. I have them right now just in the rows, and I try a few different spacings, but in the end I go with a fairly densely packed cluster. So they all start on one side of the screen, they move to the other, they move back and forth, so even when you have a full screen of invaders, it doesn't feel like they're always at the edges of the screen. And you kind of just get a little time to breathe at the beginning of the game before it ramps up in difficulty. So that's looking good, but now that I have a bunch of invaders on the screen, I'm starting to notice another issue, which is that the bullets are too random. I'm having them every frame they're checking against a random number and deciding if the bullet should go based on that. But if you've ever dealt with true random, if you've rolled a dice a whole bunch of times, you can roll 6 sixes in a row. It's rare, but it happens. And when that happens, it doesn't feel random anymore. It feels cheap and unfair. So I'm changing the parameters where instead of rolling a dice a whole bunch of times and maybe shooting a whole bunch of bullets at once and then going for a long spell without any, I'm going to instead have a minimum and a maximum time, and I'm going to pick a cooldown time between then, and every time the cooldown ends, one alien at random will shoot. So that'll give us a lot more consistency. And as I'm doing that, I have a little bit of problem with my math, and it's hilarious looking back because I'll just let this play out. I'm doing some very expert gameplay while casually explaining why I don't know why things are working. And I don't know, at least I find it humorous. It feels like it's slowing down a little bit. Let's see. No, that's picking up, if anything. Maybe I got my numbers wrong. Let's see. It never hurts to check the docs. I'm using the linear interpolate function, so I go double check that I put the parameters in right, and I don't remember, but I eventually figure it out. So I'll just show the final script, and there was a little bit of a struggle getting there, but in the end, we have the bullets acting as they should. And here's more gameplay that I find quite humorous in hindsight. I am very, very good at dodging, but very, very not good at actually hitting the alien, so I'm just shelling out here. But I did decide to make the last alien shoot twice as much as everything else. So I will have the speed will double between the second to last and the last, or the, I guess, min speed variable I'm using will double between the second to last and the last, but everything else will be going linearly, where it'll increase a little bit more each time an alien should move, and it'll jump at the end. So I just threw in a little corner case there to make that work. But yeah, so I'm just here trying to shoot, and then I end up doing a little bit more tweaking, so this isn't the final numbers, but at least the concept is there. With that dialed in, it's now time to start moving. So I'm going to put in some direction code and immediately get it wrong, and they'll shoot straight up off the top of the screen. So then I will change some things around and get them where they're moving down, but they're going to go and move way too far down. The next thing we'll do is dial it in a little more and we'll start to get closer to the Goldilocks zone. But we're trying to figure out exactly how much they should be moving down. I now have all collision bodies visible, so we can make this work a little better. But what I'm going to do is I will iterate through all of the invaders and check which one is at the bottom. And then I'm going to place this bar below the lowest invader. And what that's going to do is when it's time for them to drop, they'll start moving down, and that bar will have a sensor in it that will sense when they reach it, and it'll send the signal back around, and then the invaders will stop dropping, and they'll continue moving in, or I guess they'll move in the opposite direction. So if they were on the right, they'll move to the left. If they were on the left, they'll move to the right. So there we go. I didn't quite have that in yet, so I realized at that point that I need to make the bar iterate through. So that's the next little thing I'll add, but we are getting real close on this one. So here we are, we have basically everything working. There are now no more sudden drops. So when they hit the edge, the bar will move just a little below the lowest invader, and then they will go down to reach it. So unfortunately, they don't reset to the top yet when I get shot. That's going to be the next thing. But we have the basic invader movements down, which as far as the scripting goes on this project, that was the most important and largest part. All the other bits of scripting, quite a bit's fiddly, but there's nothing as major as getting that movement code working. All right, I have a little bit left to finish today. I've decided this will be my first actually two-part, so I think it's going to be a one-part video, but it will be a two-part project where I will be going into a second day to work on art. So I'm going to kind of leave this art as is, but I'm going to finish all of the main gameplay concepts. Okay, so I just finished adding in a couple of spawners for the motherships on both sides of the screen. So there are simply points on either side of the screen, and the main game script will spawn motherships on those 2 points. So they'll be placed just directly on top at the same position, and then they will move in from their respective side of the screen. And I just do a bit of adjusting to make sure that they are fairly frequent, I think more frequent than the original game, but we never have more than one on the screen. So at first they keep colliding with each other, or I guess they don't collide, they pass through each other, but we'll get 2 or more on the screen at one time. And I have to slow it down and hone it in to the point where we have only one at a time. But those will come in and they'll float across the screen from time to time, and those will eventually, when we have a score, they will give us a bonus. Okay, so we have a fairly simple UI setup now. I have level, I have a score, and then I have our ship count. Actually, I don't think we need level text all the time. I think I'm going to actually just flash that one. But we'll keep the score in the corner, and we'll keep the ship counter in the corner. Now, the thing I need to see is how does that look with motherships? Okay. I think this needs a little bit more work, so I'm going to keep messing around with this and try to get the UI fixed, and I will come back once that is complete. I'm back on day 2 of Space Invaders, so I have finished basically all of the coding for the game. Let me get my controller here. So we've got player movement, player shoot, invaders shoot. We have scoring is working. We also have lives. I'll wait actually till they'll drop, and then I'll take a hit, because once I get shot, they will reset to the top of the screen, and they'll kind of stay up there for a little bit. I'll do it again at the end of this level, because when I get shot with when they're moving quickly, they'll actually, as you'll see, I just ended up having them bounce back and forth on the top of the screen until I'm back and ready to fight back, so they don't get There we go. So as they're moving nice and quickly, I also have, as you can see, the speed ramping both on them and on their shot speed. But I do have, if I take a hit here, you can see they'll just kind of bounce back and forth. So they don't actually start moving down until a little bit after players in. So I figured that seemed like a nice kind of solution there so that they don't come flying down the screen too fast. One thing I still need to do is I don't have any when they come all the way to the bottom. Oh, nope, I have one life left. When they hit the bottom of the screen, I don't have any detection there. The other thing, as you can see, is I still need to finish when the level ends. I actually do have, if you see down here, it printed to do advance to next level. So that is, it is detecting a level end. It just isn't finishing, or it isn't doing anything with that. So that's what I have. I don't remember what code I've showed off before, so I will show off all of it, and I will edit out the parts that I have already shown. Game code is, I think we had most of this before. We have motherships will spawn randomly on either side, and then they'll just keep moving back and forth across the screen. They use invader scripts. They just don't have a bullet, so they'll never shoot, and they aren't told to turn around. The way that this actually works for the invaders here is they have, I was originally thinking, I know I was talking about doing something like a gimbal. What I ended up doing is simply having them move within the scene, but I have areas on all four sides that tell me where they are. So I'll have on top, left, right, and drop, which drop is just bottom. I don't know why I didn't name it bottom, but I didn't. So they'll be moving, and if I actually turn this on and play the game with, where is it? Visible collision shapes. There we go. So if I play the game with collision shapes, you can see they're bounded. So they will hit, come on. There we go. So when they hit the edge, that's when it'll tell them to drop. And then this drop line will actually, if you saw that, that moves down. So, and what that'll do is that will actually iterate through all of them, and it'll find the one on the bottom. So if I have this row removed, it'll simply drop there. So they'll always drop a fixed amount, and when they hit that line, they'll stop moving. And the top one is for when I get shot. That's the line that they will move to, and then they'll wait for me to come back. Now, I am of the belief that corner cases are the kind of like compiler warnings, where they don't necessarily mean that something's wrong, but it's a good indicator that you probably could have done it a little better. So I have a number of corner cases I had to put in. So I think I actually fixed some of them by the looks of it, but I have this grace time. Oh, here it is, on top and resetting. So I have two variables here that get set true in some functions and set false in other functions. So when I hit the top, on top is true, and it only goes to false when I think it's within drop. Where's drop? There it is. Yep. If I'm moving down, it'll turn that to false. But only if I'm not resetting, and so the resetting is set to true when I get shot, and it's set to false every time an invader shoots, because I'm taking over the invader timer and giving that I think it's 5 seconds. So once they are allowed to start shooting back, then it'll say it's no longer resetting, then it can drop, and then it'll allow me to move it up again. And all of that is just because I'm checking these collisions I'm checking these collisions on collision entered. So if I go here to, wrong one. So if I go here to top and show this, I'm using body entered. So I think there could be a better way. I don't remember if there's a continually colliding function I could have used instead to check if something's always in, but the problem I was having is if I'm here and I say to reset, it would move up farther. So I think I had some footage earlier of that happening. So yeah, probably a better way to do it, but it's working and I'm feeling pretty happy about it. So, with that said, we have a game. It's a little bit kind of static and boring. It doesn't look super great. I like the art that I finished, but obviously the invaders don't have much art. There's no animation. They're not moving. Not only does it not look kind of cool like the uh, what is it, 1990 version that I uh, grew up playing, but it also isn't necessarily even cool like the original Space Invaders because they were more dynamic than this one. So I'm gonna try to work on the art today. So yeah, I'm gonna just jump in and I got over here Libre Sprite open. I'm gonna have to grab the still frames and I'm just gonna do what I did before. So yeah, just gonna kind of hang out and make some art. I kind of tried to cheat a little bit here, and it turned out that was a very bad idea. I thought that I could simply take this picture and copy and paste it, and then use that as a reference for starting point. Uh, in previous kind of games I've done or things I've worked on, I've never done pixel art per se, but I have taken photographs and turned them into pixel art and done a little bit of touching them up, and it's worked out really well. So I tried to shortcut it here, and it definitely didn't work. And part of the problem is that these images are so pixelated to begin with that there's not a lot left for me to work with. So I went and spent some time online and ended up finding it looked like fan art, but there was a drawing that was very crisp. This is a PS1 and I believe Nintendo 64 or GameCube. I think it's N64 game. So it's very old. It doesn't have a lot of graphic or high graphical fidelity, and the version I played back in the day was a PC version, but I couldn't find that anywhere. And I back in the day I turned my all of my games into ISOs when I moved out from my parents' house, and wherever that went, whatever hard drive that was on, that's been lost. So I don't have my old games to play. I couldn't find it online, so I ended up playing and recording the PS1 version, hence the extremely blocky graphics. So this was kind of a failure and a false start, so I'm going to get back to actually drawing my own pixel art in a minute. And that is one invader down. Now that it is in the game, I'm realizing that it is way too big. The other invader, or the classic invader, I should say, that I had earlier was a lot smaller than this one. It didn't fill the entire rectangle. So now that I'm realizing that all my invaders won't fit, I'm going to have to go back and resize all of these, resize them in the game. What I ended up doing was changing it from a size 4 to a size of 3. So the player ship, 1 pixel takes up 4 pixels on screen, whereas these invaders, 1 pixel is taking up 3. So I'm mixing and matching the size a bit, but the player bullets are already a size of 2. So it seems to work. It was a little bit of a kind of hacky way to do that. I was hoping to have all of my pixel sizes match, but I just didn't plan ahead. So I'm going to draw in the corners of the sprites, and then I will populate it with all 4 types and all 4 rows, even though I've only drawn a couple of them, and then I'll draw the rest in a little bit. So with that done, we change the color of the top one to blue, the middle one is green, and it is now time to draw 3 and 4. So I'm going to block them out, do a tiny bit of shading, and then I'll go back and shade all of them. And after that, we will have some nice looking and fully shaded Space Invaders. Okay, and with that, we have all of the invaders are drawn and shaded. Let's just push this up to GitLab real quick, and then we're gonna go and start drawing the 4 bullets that we need. Alright, with the art done, I am nearing the end of day 2, and this game isn't quite complete. The main thing it's missing is still sound, and I will also end up adding an explosion effect before it's all said and done. But I have a bunch of little things I need to clean up, a bunch of bugs, and various issues, but for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over most of that. As a reminder, these are all open source. I'll have a link below if anyone wants to see the finished version of the game. It will at some point be on itch in the future. I'm still working on getting that pushed up, but I'll do that soon. So before I start the sound, I'm going to need to finish the level progression. So I'll throw that in, and then that will be it for kind of the UI and that sort of stuff. And then when the invaders hit the bottom of the level, I also need to have a lose condition for both of those. So with those fixed, we can then move on to sound. I like that one. As I'm shopping around for various clips, I stumble across a couple of these very interesting sounding ones and start to get a fairly good idea about the soundtrack for the game. So I found 10 of these little audio clips and I decided to try stringing them together, and I think it turned out really well. So now we have this cool adaptive soundtrack. I'm just going to need to trim these a little bit to remove those gaps, and then that's going to be perfect. If you want to see my very advanced code for this adaptive soundtrack engine, here it is. Feel free to use it in your own games. But yeah, that is that half of the sound. So let's just get the actual sound effects now. I'm also going to make this quick explosion animation that we're going to throw on everything as we're attaching the sound effect. Hopefully it turns out really well. Yeah! Alright, now we're going to make a for loop to spawn some of these explosions when we shoot the mothership, because that doesn't have enough noise. I'm also going to throw the mothership sound on when it enters the scene, and we'll see how that looks. Not bad, but I think we can throw in a few more explosions. We're going to do 5 and 8. Almost there, just a tiny bit more. These explosions are fun, so we're going to do all the explosions just like we did for the mothership, but even more when the player dies. So we're going to move this over to the player code. We're going to say is shot. We have 5 seconds to blow up as much as we want. Okay, maybe that's a little bit much. We'll dial that back slightly, and then I think we're done. Let's take a look at the final game. Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. Whew. Unfortunately, I ran out of time for doing animation, which would have been nice to have. But like I said, this is a ongoing series, and I will be learning more about that kind of stuff with future games. But I am proud of what I was able to accomplish in just 2 days, and I will be back next with asteroids. So excited to see that one.